Thank you, everyone, for coming here this morning and joining us for this interface between the Resonance Vancouver New Music Festival and we here at Emily Carr are part of Leaning Out of Windows, which is a art and physics collaboration project that we have support from the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, and it's a 4-year project where we bring together artists and physicists to look at how the languages within disciplines cross over and what happens as those languages cross through these different knowledge practices. And the Resonance Festival has, in a sense, plugged into the Leaning Out of Windows project, and so one of the teams within our latest phase of interactions is also one of Giorgio's teams, team number 11, with Giorgio Brady Marks and Des Ramsey and Art Olin, the two physicists. So it's been fabulous to see this part of the team and what has emerged from their work. The rest of the teams, there are 10 more teams of each team has 2 or 3 artists from different disciplines, one scholar from different areas, whether it's cultural theory, art history, earth sciences, neuropsychology, and 1 or 2 physicists. And so each team has been working for 1 year on the topic of emergence and looking at how that idea, how that concept comes through their various disciplines. And so they've been having a year of conversations and interactions. Some teams have had more interactions than others, depending on, it is a test. It's the whole project is always testing models of how can we create a hybrid kind of knowledge practices, sharing across different disciplines. So this latest phase of 1 year is another experiment, and we're looking at what comes from that and how do we learn how to speak to each other across our knowledge practices. And our exhibition, thank you, is in January, and so some of you that are part of this project, we're looking forward to hosting this exhibition from January, about January 8th until the end of January, and there will be also a symposium for that. And I also just want to acknowledge that Emily Carr sits on the unceded lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations.
This one. I think everyone knows why we're here, so we won't go in describing the idea. The reason why I wanted to facilitate this table ronde is that because when we bring all these beautiful people in town and then disappear after 2 days, say, oh, we didn't have enough time to talk, we didn't have enough. I mean, the artists always are the one that bring and share lots of good energy, but I'm a bit starving of, kind of good energy is feeding my imagination. So I like to put people together if possible to share more. And this was the only time, I'm really sorry, to do that early morning on Saturday. So, and to facilitate further, with Ingrid, we just put down a few questions, very verbose question about the topic of the festival and our research. And I was hoping that we can kind of entertain some exchange about this idea so that we can share what are we doing, how are we doing in relation to this specific angle of observation. That is not a new one, because I think the idea of emergence is part of the creative process of any human being. I mean, our knowledge, our essence emerge out of a living practice that involve technology from the very early time, reflection and philosophy and poetry, imagination, vision. So it's nothing new, but we are kind of in a situation for me which in the artistic world there is still a very strong kind of separation of roles and practices, and I think that in going forward, but that's my personal vision, we should try to harmonize way more in a sort of a kind of a, I don't know, hybridization of practices that involve our full, whole perceptual being, the viscerality of our body, the listening skills of our ears and body again, and our sight and all the senses in a kind of in a very holistic way. So I think that's, for me, it's an interesting process, and it's been inspiring in my work pretty much a lot, especially when I moved to Canada, I have to say, for some very nice reason, which we won't go into right now. So thank you again. So it's a very free form, and I encourage everyone that want to talk to do so, and we can start answering questions or talking. When you do so, introduce yourself so we know your name and what you do briefly. So someone was asking me, okay, what, you want me to start like that? What is emergence for me? I don't know. For me, emergence is anything that kind of put me in a position to ask myself, what is it? What is it? What's happening? And that in any circumstance, like when I'm walking on the street and I hear a sound in the back, and the first question is kind of, what is it? It's not a rational question, it's just a kind of acknowledgement of an event that manifests itself. Sometimes is you know, if I hear two cars crashing together, oh yeah, I know what it is, unfortunately. But other times I have no idea. And that's happening more and more from the time when I started working on sound many years ago. I had my studio had a very simple setup with like 3-4 CD players and 2 record players. And what I would do, I put 3 or 4 CD on my CD players and 2 record players in my record players randomly, and I let them go, and I open faders in my mixer, either all together or in different time. And I really enjoyed that serendipity of discovery of different things emerge out of nowhere, and I have no idea what it is. But in that case, I would be able to stop my machine and say, oh, what is playing right now? Like this. What are the components, the chaotic oscillators idea that are playing together, interacting in ways that something new that is the sum or the filtering or the layering of different things that I can control in an analytic way, but manifest themselves as an image, a sonic image. So that, for me, is the main idea of emergence in the way I relate to my practice and life. I mean, even with my kids, you know, when I brought my kids in the forest when they were young, coming from a town of buildings, I mean, I wanted to see what happened to me and them, and instead of telling the kids, look at the beautiful cedar, look at the beautiful eagle, I kind of follow my father's teaching. There was don't talk when you walk in a space, and enjoy the beauty of the space. And I think there is that level of acquisition that we get when we are alive. You know, we learn because we are let the energy of and the beauty of things come into us when there is beauty, and there is not always beauty coming to us, but it's kind of a dialogical form.
The reason I proposed this topic of emergence is that we've had several other topics that were a bit alien to the artists and quite familiar to the physicists, and so that put us at a big advantage, which we exploited, I think. And I thought it would be nice to have something that physicists can't agree about, but which artists pretty much figure is a solved problem. But I may not be right about artists feeling that it's a solved problem. Anyway, the original sense of emergence in physics is the question of whether the phenomenon is contained within its components, okay? Or is the whole greater than the sum of its parts? But that's actually a different question. So there are many examples in physics, we think we understand everything about electrons. And yet, when you put a whole bunch of electrons together in an interesting situation, they behave as if they'd lost their identity, become different kinds of particles entirely, with fractional charge and bizarre properties. And so we have managed to explain that. No, not we. I mean, some physicists have managed to explain that after the fact, but no one would ever have been able to predict it in advance. And so,
Still don't understand it.
oh, I certainly don't understand it. But I mean, you know, Lachlan got the Nobel Prize for explaining how that could happen. But a little bit less, you know, obscure issue is we understand the scattering of light pretty well. Rayleigh scattering is a very familiar phenomenon that every undergraduate learns in the physics course, if they take one. And yet, there's absolutely no, it makes no sense to say that a sunset can be reduced to Rayleigh scattering, even though that's the cause. That's what makes it happen, that plus the particulates and different gases in the atmosphere. But there's something that emerges from that is way beyond the physics of how it happens. And if you think about music, if you believe that each note has a certain psychological effect on the listener, you put together, you get a certain collection of notes and you play them at the same time, and that has an effect on the listener that's completely not in the individual notes, right? So there's an emergent behavior of the reaction of the listener. But my thinking about emergence now is strongly influenced by the fact that the other night I went to a philosopher's cafe where they talked about free will. And I really hate it when philosophers try to explain things, but but the idea of free will is an emergent idea, I believe. And it is completely part of the emergence of consciousness itself, which is a problem which philosophers have been bashing their heads against for generations. And right now we're building computers which simulate many of the functions of the human brain. And at this point we say, yes, but it's just a simulation. But at some point, it'll be able to simulate it so well that you won't be able to tell whether you're talking to a human or I mean, actually, they can already do that. But I mean, even if you hang out with it for, you know, a year and talk to it all the time, you won't be able to tell whether it's simulating consciousness or actually has some. And the wonderful thing about that, the wonderful thing about living in this time, is that we may actually find out whether consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. And if so, how does it work? And from that, you have, I think, the minute you believe that you're conscious, you believe that you have free will. They sort of go together, right? And it doesn't make any difference whether free will is just a mechanical phenomenon that we think we have and it's not real. It makes no difference at all, right? And the same thing is true for lots of other emergent phenomena. It doesn't matter whether they're real in the sense of completely explicable or not. They're still emergent because of their effect on us. That's probably a good place for me to stop.
Do you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Suzanne Kite, or Kite. Yeah, I'm performing tonight. I have rehearsals at noon. Oh my God. So yeah, I mean, what I wanted to say about emergence, my practice involves body interfaces and constructing systems for the body to enter into communication with computer systems and be one with that computer system on stage, live. And a lot of my research now has to do with, uses machine learning, but works at, right now we're writing a policy paper through CFAR about indigenous philosophy and AI, or more indigenous protocols, and for building artificial intelligence. And so when I think of emergence, I think that it's an interesting word. It's a very popular word right now, but there's so many other words that do that work. Emergence is, you know, it could be, I mean, a miracle is like the other really fun word that I associate with emergence. But one thing that comes up for me, and it's really great that you brought up AI, and that to me, emergence is just communication with the non-human, and communication meaning like, so Libra Little Bear is a Blackfoot philosopher, really amazing writer, highly underpublished. And Libra Little Bear has a really great quote about how humans are something about tuning in on a radio dial, and there's different things we can tune into, but we often don't. And so communication, he proposes that communication with non-humans is just turning that radio dial, and yeah, so which is a great metaphor, because if we imagine, and it's what's really important about listening and sound and the practice of listening that has kind of emerged out of this compositional history, is that we can say, what does it mean to listen to AI or for consciousness or for non-human communication? Because what I was thinking as I was listening was, what if things don't emerge? What if we're just tuning in?
Thank you. I want to add into this artificial intelligence process and everything. But first, one of the things with Paloma and the collective Interspecifics, I'm Leslie Garcia from Mexico, and we always talk about the position of the observer in the phenomena, and that way the observer is constructing and intervening the results of different experiments. And I like this idea because it's also a way to control, not directly, but to influence the phenomena that is emerging in front of us. And in that sense, it's something related to our level of understanding of the space and also the things we are looking for. And I like this because we ask a lot, like, what happens if we remove the human observer from the experimental area and we put this artificial intelligence to experience the processes? What it will emerge in this case? It will be different from the reality we create, or it will be a completely external reality that is going to be created in this process. But at the end, it's a thing of observation. That's one thing we like to address a lot. And also emergence as a feature of the living, as a feature and a characteristic of something that is changing, transforming, and evolving in a space all the time. Then it creates different levels of relationship within its own environment and the others. And there is the importance of the otherness as a level of understanding, that what happens if I expand my sensorial abilities through the other? What happens if I get features of understanding from these other living organisms or more abstract or complex ones? And of course, the political implications of these points of views, because then the anthropocentric view is not that important anymore. It's put into the level of the understanding because we speak in this verbal language, but then we open ourselves to get other ways of organization, to get other ways of building the reality through organisms that doesn't have the same features for communication that we have. And then we understand communication in a broader level. Communication, maybe as in engineering, as the transmission of two signals that can be interchanged, but maybe they don't have a linguistic meaning, but they have an energetic one. And then we can work with this. And for us in our music and the process we are trying to perform, we use this a lot. That's the main element we try to explore. And we like to call these things ontological machines, because we like to think as the performance space, as the machine, the technological building, as a way to have our own experience of the phenomena, not as a secondary thing we read about it and we learn because someone has the experience before, but something that we can build together and see the emergence of these phenomena in the same place at the same time. And what happens when it's not just one person being the observer, what happens is all of us together. And that's something we like to explore in our work, and in a way that's the thing I understand it. And yeah, and I think it's something in that direction, like what can we take from the living as a main feature of this planet, and of course the way they relate to each other. And in the case with bacteria, we can see things like negative entropy happening inside a petri dish, and it's really strong to see this. And you know, the relation from the micro to the macro. You have these microorganisms behaving like if they were the universe. And it's very amazing to have the possibility to see that there's this universality crossing all these different phenomena, and you see these different patterns present in all kinds of things, from the stars to bacteria to particles to different levels. I would love to work with particles, but it's a little bit difficult in a DIY environment to do that. But maybe in 10 years, we're going to have the technology to do it.
So my name is Atao Tanaka. I'm on the program tonight as well. So you haven't seen what I will perform, but I was very happy to hear Kite say that she's performing in an interface of her body with computer-based systems. My work is also at the interface of the body and technology. And so emergence is something that I have been thinking about quite a bit. And I think it's really interesting what Kite and Leslie say about observation and about the potential of communication. But I sort of stop short of the communication bit, because then it's really charged. But I do think that emergent processes are things that do occur in nature. But by inventing the word emergence, we're imposing an observational human point of view on natural processes. In nature itself, things evolve, things progress, evolve, develop on each other. Nature might not think of that as emergent, right? Humans do. And so why do humans do? And it's, in fact, it's this human point of view that makes us want to create models of this concept, okay, for computer systems. And so my definition of emergence does come from complex systems theory, where we may create systems of increasing complexity, where the increase in complexity might be an iterative and self-reinforcing process. And then we try to apply this back on nature and then think that, okay, the world is like this. And so then we'll create machines, and then they'll become intelligent, and then they become conscious. But in fact, I think that's a red herring, you know, because we are still creating them on our model. And so this is where this understanding of consciousness, we are getting closer. But I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime. You know, when Immanuel Kant was thinking about this, free will, you know, he thought it might happen in his lifetime, you know. Daniel Dennett talks about free will, and there's the book Elbow Room. And we are getting much closer, and there is a real rapprochement of philosophy and science in the work of Dennett. But I think it's a receding horizon. You know, the closer we get to thinking that we do based on our systems of knowledge, our current systems of knowledge, actually, nature and nature within us are only just going to recede. You know? So for myself, I just try to deal with these questions, and I will get to the AI question in a minute, because it's the topic of the day, isn't it? But so I'm a musician. I'm not a linguist, but I do like to think about words. And so if we take emergence, and I don't know if this is really the etymological tearing apart of emergence, but I mean, we're trying to define it here, but we know words like emergency, you know, emergency, exit, you know. And we imagine that emergencies are things that are urgent, right? So and gent, right? But if we take out the emergenciness of emergence, so that something emerges is something coming out. And then the Gen C in emergency, and this is where I'm on etymologically very, very shaky ground, but for the moment, and this is probably not true, but let's think of the Gen C of emergency as agency, okay? And so to emerge is something that may come out, and it may come out under whatever conditions, right? But then when we think about agency, then we as humans are applying a kind of intentionality to things. And so somehow, and I've just made this up on the spot on this pretty good coffee, indeed, because over the Vancouver coffee is pretty good, I guess, you know.
It's better now.
Yeah, it's better now, yeah. So just in listening to the first few speakers, yeah, I just thought emergence, we think of it as this sort of increasing complexity that just happens naturally. But I think that there is, in emergence, a form of agency, a form of intentionality that we try to bring to it. And that may be the difference with emergent processes as they happen in nature anyway. But once we observe them, we are imposing our systems of knowledge. And once we try to build systems, complex systems, then there is a true intentionality to say, well, we want the AI algorithm to become better, you know, more sophisticated, more fine-grained, more intelligent, right? And that's not the algorithm's fault. It's our fault, actually, for wanting to do that. And so the machine learning algorithms that I use on stage tonight are in fact not very intelligent at all. And I've been fighting with them. And so since I'm jet lagged, I was working on my Max patch at 6 o'clock in the morning. And Max is this node-based programming language that many of us use to create these interactive environments. And so I have a system that learns gestures of the body and is able to make associations between these gestures that are captured. I'm using physiological signals. So I'm using electromyogram signals from the muscle. So truly naturally occurring phenomena of the body. But then compositionally associating gestures with certain sounds, electronic sounds, and recorded music sounds. And I didn't need machine learning to do this. I've been using muscle interaction for about over 25 years before these neural networks and so forth were fast enough. But I've been fascinated with the potential of trying to apply neural networks to this since the 90s, and it never really succeeded. And you'll find out tonight whether success is... that's interesting to say all this before I perform. But I actually didn't do it for a long time. Tonight's concert is my third concert where I'll actually use a neural network live on stage. But for the past 25 years, I haven't, because it just wasn't that interesting. You know, it was too brittle, or I couldn't figure out a way to communicate with it. So maybe here, communicate is the word. But what I'm finding is I'm not communicating to the algorithm. I'm not saying, oh, hi, how you doing? I'm saying, here's a gesture, here's a sound, deal with it. Right? And, but then what's interesting about the machine learning algorithm is that it does deal with it. And then it spits something back at you, and then it says, okay, here's what I think. And then I say, okay, that's not very interesting, okay? Yeah, so we have, in my field, we have a kind of iterative design and development method called interactive machine learning, where instead of big data and artificial intelligence, we just throw all the world's data at a convolutional neural network and let it figure out the world. We get to interact. And maybe this is communication, but I prefer, in our circles of computer-human interaction, we call this co-adaptation. So as much as the algorithm, I'm interacting with it, and it spits something back, then I can spit something else at it. If I like it, I give more of it. And so it becomes like a reinforcement learning process. If I don't like it, I might, in my system, edit the training set. And so this is interactive machine learning, where we are able to intervene on the algorithm. And so, is this an emergent process? Well, yes. It's not the algorithm that's emergent, it's the process that's emergent. And so in my performance, what I do try to do, and you'll see, it's extremely awkward, but I start from a blank slate. And you'll see pushing foot pedals, train, record, more, less. You know, it's extremely laborious. But I do try to expose that process in performance. And so there's two of the pieces tonight. The first piece and the last piece will be based on that. And so this is my way of excusing myself for an awkward performance. But so just to finish, this has been a bit long-winded, and maybe this will get us to the artists who have already played. I missed Leslie's and Paloma's performance because I was still flying in. But you're right, Jess, in saying that there is something in music that is emergent. But the emergent process, you said, is the way that maybe music is made and then the way the music is heard or listened to. But in fact, I think we've seen last night, in last night's concert, emergent processes, once again, in the interaction between the human performer and the musical system, whether that musical system is a computer-based audiovisual system like CHDH, or historical instruments, like the recorders and harpsichords of Airborne. And here, I think the emergence is very similar to physics. So this is all coming back around now to what you started saying, Jess, is can emergence then be what goes beyond, a process that goes beyond the elements that we bring to it? And indeed, music in this sense is similar to physics in that there are, in Baroque music, voice leading and the systems of harmony, and so forth. And in the audiovisual performances, equations of oscillation and so forth. But if we stay within those systems, we get kind of boring music. And but it's then when Airborne took their sort of Baroque basis in that last piece and then went into these feedback like sounds, then I thought, wow, something is emerging, from this that builds on the structures, but then goes beyond. And similarly in CHDH, yes, there are pixels, an oscillator, and Nicolas and Cyril are overlaying their shaders, but it's at the moments when the unexpected happens, And sometimes there's the seeming mistakes, when there's a kind of a jump, and then you realize, okay, it's not just an algorithmic audiovisual process, but there's human intervention in this thing. There were some layers that I think happened in last night's performance that probably weren't planned, but they did result in a performance as we heard it. And so in that sense, there is emergence in music, as it is performed in the unexpected.
I want to just mention that I appreciated the particular angle that you both raised, which is about the aspect of the closed system and the interpretation. Through emergence, and to tell you the truth, I read about it because it's not something it was part of my vocabulary, but even though it's part of my practice. True emergence is when when patterns of individual entities contribute to creating something that wouldn't exist without all the different parts being involved. That's my very simplistic explanation of what an emergent behavior would be. And when you were mentioning about nature, which they don't think about emergence, they just are. And us as human are constantly interpreting, creating systems, making decisions about what we think is the right way, the right behavior. And a true emergence would have to, in our art, would have to be an open system, and a system that actually where we really do lose our individuality for something that's much larger. Like in the wisdom, there's a very interesting book I read about the wisdom of crowd, which explains how actually crowds are very intelligent. And if you don't, for example, if you don't mess up the democratic process by manipulating people, democracy is a really working tool for people, for humanity. But we've started to tinker with that. So in a way, as artists, we're always creating, we're always interpreting. I simply wanted to make the point that we're always interpreting, and this is where the artistic voice comes into play. You have a system, you have a system, you have a system, and you would give this system to other artists, and they would create a different kind of art because of all the decisions that comes into play. So there are these constructs that we make to interact, and I think it's irresistible to not use machines and data because it's there. Why not using it? Why starting from scratch when we can have all this? But at the end of the day, the artistic practice is a bunch of decisions that the artist is making at the end of the day. I just wanted to point this out. Maybe when we work in a deep collaboration where a lot of elements are contributing to the whole and a lot of elements are open, have a certain open systems, then maybe something happens that's closer to emergence. But I think that we are interpreting, we're making decisions, we're manipulating the data. We're not doing a pure manifestation of emergence.
I wanted to say one thing, because one thing that I think I feel very strongly when we talk about this thing is the fact that, all this beautiful reflection and idea bring to for me, the issue of, okay, what is it an agency? What is this agency actually can do in terms of, we present these things, and I'm doing in a pretty much institutionalized form. You know, there is a venue, there is a theater, there is a space. We create space where we share this energy, but they are kind of a, we try to engage people in this process, or at least make people aware that there is an agency from their side. But I feel that we still don't have a space where all this energy that we put in thinking and working with our creative energy and forces are to a large benefit of transformation, or I don't know, kind of empowering a bit more the larger community. I feel privileged to do what I do, but I think that I'm in a situation in which I feel the need to get stuff out in a way that becomes a bit more relevant. I'm not a politician. I don't want to enter into the political discourse because I don't any oppositional kind of stance to bring forwards. But I think as artists and creator, with these ideas, we should be able to envision, and I've tried to do it myself, places where this energy can be embodied in a form that is a bit more powerful in terms of. I think I don't want to be squished in a form of a practice that has an artistic, aesthetic quality, but is just that. I mean, I'm kind of done with the aesthetic discourse. I don't care of people liking or disliking thing. And I'm sorry about, if people feel offended about that. But I think we have to kind of go in a direction that is post-romantic. I mean, finally post-romantic. The romanticism of European culture is being carried on forever. I mean, we are tired of bleeding hearts, okay, or Valentines. And that's the thing. I mean, all these ideas that we talk about are really strongly going in a direction of a revolutionary way of thinking and questioning. We don't know if we'll find the truth about the way but the liking or disliking is irrelevant. And I think that's the thing that we have to go and find ways where the way of living in a place where we don't play the aesthetic game, or I like this, or I like that, that goes in the monetization of everything that you can then decide you want to keep or you don't want to keep. It's just bullshit, you know? And the intelligence of things is actually present there. We know there is. We may care or not, but trees are intelligent. And whatever that means, I don't even know. But there are people that are trying to figure that out or try to find a way to allow for that kind of idea to stick with us in a better way than just, you know, the idea of the beautiful tree that we hug. And I love huggers a lot. Because at least they do something about the trees. So I don't know if that's bring us to any other story, but the emergency is not just the emergency out of something that becomes visible as a creative object, but also the sharing of a possibility out of which people will emerge themselves with something different, with a different, it's enough that people, you know, like watching us and staring at a spider web, oh, go back in the forest the next day and look at things in a different way. Great, that's already a very important agency that you give to that specific behavior. So I don't know, if it's another question, and I think it was here in a sort of a verbose way, you know, in the fourth question here addressed, I think that. And also in terms of authorship and originality.
I'm Ben Bogart. I'm another Leaning Out of Windows participant. I'm an artist working with generative processes in media art. And so I think the thing about emergence and something that's coming up also with this idea of artificial intelligence and modeling is prediction. That really we're talking about the machine understanding some relationship in order to predict what will happen in the future or what will happen on unseen information. And so all bound up in that is ideas of noise versus signal, and what is the thing that you want it to learn versus what is the thing that it is actually going to learn, because data can be very biased. So I think that idea of science as prediction is interesting as a counterpoint to perhaps art as avoiding prediction or breaking against prediction. So the idea of now artists working with artificial intelligence is interesting because those are predictive machines. So if we're using them to break predictions, are we just going back to those initial conditions, as in randomness? And where's the role of randomness, which is integral to machine learning? So how does randomness fit into creativity? But really this prediction versus surprise dichotomy thing, I think is really interesting. And so what occurs to me is the possibility that anything that's not predictable becomes emergent. And I've been reading a lot of Karen Barad recently, and so there's something about perhaps that prediction is part of making reality. By predicting it, we make it true. And the possibility of everything being emergent, right down to the existence of particles, or existence itself, I guess Brad might say. Anyway, that's it.
I'm Art Olin. I'm a physicist from Triumph. And I was going to bring this back a little bit from the artistic to the physics perspective. Did anyone hear me?
If you keep the mic near.
Yeah, I don't think we need the mics in this place.
We need it for recording.
Okay. So I will start with point 2 of the questions, just to define how narrow my mind is. I think there's an objective reality, and emergence in that sense is definitely in the eye of the beholder. It's our understanding of what's going on that changes. And my physics definition, or picture of emergence, is close to Jess's necessarily, but it's, we have these systems that we think we understand, and we understand how to interpolate and extrapolate them. And what we usually call it in physics is we know how to do a linear extrapolation, where you make the sound a little louder, you continuously change the frequency, you continuously change the duration, and so on. So these are linear systems. And my emergence is when you put these systems together and you come up with something that you can never get from these systems by linear projections. And that's so you, without imposing the complexity, you'll never get there. You can't get there without the, and then you have make a new picture which includes this complexity. Now, I also have a connection with machine learning because I've been using it too. I think the real key, the really interesting thing that you get from it is more like the power of evolution. That's the element that distinguishes it. So in my work, you look at a bunch of noisy data and you're trying to pick a signal out of it, you know, the standard problem, and it's deterministic. And I know when I got there because now I see my signal and it's very clear. Brady actually showed that signal a couple of nights ago, but it's, you would never see it in the noise. We've taken one part in 10,000 of the signal in order to pull that part out. But sort of the way we got there at first was we look at a bunch of apparently patternless noise that is basically places where light flashes because a particle goes through it. And we use our understanding of physics to say, there's a particle there, I can draw a track, I can compute the track, I can compute where the track came from, I know the time, that's going to tell us something. And then we found that we could actually, so we started off saying, okay, this is one way of getting rid of the noise and picking out our signal because we understand how it behaves. And then we said, well, we'll take these constructed quantities, the tracks, and we'll throw them into machine learning algorithms with something else. For those of you who are into machine learning, this was what we call a random forest. And this worked beautifully, and we really got much better signal to noise that way. And then one of the young guys said, forget about these constructed things, just throw it all into the into a neural net and see what happens. And of course, it's a huge blow to our ego. It does almost as well. We can still beat it. That is, using the random forest, we can beat the neural net thing. But when you think about it, it's also the way consciousness must have developed. That's an evolutionary process. And the modeling in neural nets is sort of an evolutionary process that gives you a nonlinear way of getting to things that we try and extrapolate linearly. So that's my intuition about this.
Thanks. It's really stimulating. There's so many aspects that comes to mind. I just want to focus on one thing. For me, I have several, let's say, areas of my artistic practice. And the one that you saw yesterday, the drawing practice, has to do with cognition. And in that respect, I would define this as what I do is, or what happens is, or emergence would be a phenomenon that comes to consciousness through a perceptual process. So with emergence, you could think that something new emerges, something new that has to do with knowledge and producing of knowledge. And that actually made me think of embodiment and what the relationship is between body and mind, if you even want to think about this dualism. And embodiment as a concept that has been discussed by people like Varela and Elena Roche and Thompson, that says that it's not the mind alone that produces content. Of course, it's embedded it's situated within your body, and that plays a role not only like physiologically, that your brain produces thought or whatever your brain produces, consciousness, through those self-organized activities, the biological activities, but also because there's an interaction with the environment. And so there can be, so this kind of knowledge or activities of the mind can be separated from everything around, from the world itself, actually. And what interests me here is that that means that emergence or knowledge is always co-constructed, and the co-constructing aspect of it is really exciting, and that's why I'm also actually very grateful for what you said. That would actually mean that this concept of the individual artist's genius is also questioned by that. Not only in participatory art, where you work with other people in order to create meaning collectively, but even as an individual artist, you never create something on your own. So it's about a subject positioning and the questioning of that emergence and knowledge production always lives in this context of a system of domination and power discussions that have traditionally in the Western world been very male-dominated, so that the male subject positioning, how you look at the world, has been, you know, being conveyed as a universal subject, as if there wouldn't be very different subject positionings, like even not only, you know, gendered and in terms of ethnic backgrounds and in terms of being able or not, being white or not, but also in terms of all the other subject positions, trees, anything in the world that could be considered as intelligent and alive and with a perspective. And so what I think with Emergence, what interests me here is this co-creation of knowledge, that and also where that positions us in terms of relationship to the world.
Just a very short comment. Yes, your last sentence about how we can collaborate, and I missed your name when you mentioned about that the emergence is in the eye of the beholder. Okay. I appreciated your comment because we always think of science as being an objective, repeatable experiments, and that's how we like to think of science. I never believe it. But still, there is an attempt to be objective. There's an attempt to study and examine the world from an objective point of view and be able to explain it. And I really appreciate this experiment you make here with putting scientists with artists, because I think that what defines artists is that we are so permeable to the world we live in, and we have this desire to make something out of thin air from it. And this could be a curse or a blessing, depending how our career goes or the flux and goes. But this is the difference, is that we do observe the world, but it's from but it's really this impulse to make something from nothing and express our experience of the world. And the opportunity to be with scientists and to go to a more objective world and to gather a bunch of data and a bunch of information and then still do our thing, which is an impulse and a personal vision. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
What I was trying to get at was a vision that there's a world that's subjective, that's the science thing, and that's what you repeat and do the experiments on. But our understanding of it is completely different. That is our understanding. The world doesn't care about that. That's the thing that we're developing.
I don't know what time I have to go, but okay, I'm just gonna talk now, so in case I can't talk later. So I'm trying to wrangle all of the things that I'm hearing, and one thing that is coming up for me is you mentioned about male-dominated science bias sort of thing, and I'm also hearing here a lot of like Western subject positioning, which is. I think I'm the only Native person here. I'll talk to Ferdinand, I guess. And it is subjectivity. To me, it is subjectivity all the way down. And what's interesting here is that there's a lot of separation in language going on about like the separation of nature and the human still like in the language. And I wanted to. It's Leroy Littlebear is always relevant, but I just want to say the actual name of the text that I'm referring to, Leroy Littlebear and Ryan Heavyhead's Conceptual Anatomy of the Blackfoot Word. And in it, they propose that they work with physicists during their research on this and a couple other things, but the lack of separation of nouns and verbs, it's very simplified, in the Blackfoot language makes it really prime to do experimental physics and conceptual exercises because there's no separation between, you don't have to worry about objects being separate from the non-objects, which is really interesting. And to me, they propose, they didn't propose it, but in my mind, what they propose is that perhaps, the English language does, even the word emergence is kind of, as we linguistically or its verbness or its nounness prevents accuracy. So that was one thing that was coming up for me. The other thing is, I was thinking about what is the ethics of emergence? And we're talking about relationality and not aesthetics, but maybe relational aesthetics, which is one entire section of thinking about art. But there's other types of, and I think David Garneau, who's an art a painter and a writer and a critic, and lots of other people are trying to define what the difference is between, what is relational methodology, what is participatory art, what is relational aesthetics, and then what is to me what are the protocols and indigenous relationality that comes to art and does new things, but also does very, very old things, because let's see. I was thinking about relationships are key, and if we're going to say, there is an ethics that can emerge from emergence, then what are those? What are those ethics? Like, is it valuing the non-human? Is it saying that there are frequencies and signals that can be heard? And I was thinking of a couple examples. First, more of a political relationality example. So in our culture, we have war shirts, hair shirts, and there's on the plains. There's a couple different versions, but so this shirt was created using inanimate objects that do highly animate things. So hair, supposedly inanimate, hide, dead, inanimate, but what happens, the participatory or relational thing that goes on is we have multiple elements and people have to give their hair to the hair shirt maker in order to make a powerful object. So we have and then what happens is when you wear that shirt to war, the bullets will just will fly by you and not. But this happens so it seems a magical thing. Maybe it's emergent that you emerge from war unscathed magically. But actually, what it probably is you have this system of people who say, I'm politically behind you're going to war, and then when you go to war, people protect you more. There's like a million tiny little things that happen in order to create the miracle. The other example is rocks themselves. So, and my research goes more into this because the thing with AI, and to say that there is something emergent or it's the, okay, so to me, and the way I think about this emergence thing is that all of these things are physical. And while we can talk about processes as being emergent, the thing is all of these things, all these processes are tied to the actual physical world. There is an objective physical world, and what happens, so let's say, for example, AI is, it's a system. I don't know where we want to say like AI exists. Does it exist, you know, in the ether? Is AI the connection between things? Is music just the air pushing our ears? Like where do we locate that emergent property? And to me, I locate it in the physical realm. I say, you know, AI is built of physical things. It's built of melted rocks and minerals and metals, which are located in contextualized physical places. And those contextualized physical places have their own ethics and have that, you know, that what seems like a miracle on one end is a series of you know, almost infinite relationalities. So yeah, those were all the thoughts that I had.
I want to make a couple of complaints, I guess, things that have been bothering me ever since I saw this, the ad for this, the resonances. Somehow it bothers me to say that resonances are the appearing of something new, right? It seems to me that a resonance is intrinsically the recognition of something familiar. Okay, in physics, a resonance is when you drive a system at a frequency that it just wants to do, right? And it's okay, that's the end of that complaint. But the other thing is that the idea that music in particular, that aesthetics is bullshit. I don't think it is. I think that the emergence of music over the millennia is where you play a note and you say, okay, that's that note, and you play another note, and if it has a certain relationship to that first note, you say, ooh, that sounds nice, right? Now, that's how all of the music that we have now emerged, is that these certain relationships between notes that we find pleasing for some reason, right? And now there's theories about why we find it pleasing. But I think it's people noticed it fairly early on that there were certain relationships. Now there's different relationships in different cultures that people find pleasing. But now that's pretty well thrashed out. And we have extremely complex music that takes at full advantage of all those sort of understood pleasing resonances. But there's still the room for things which are interesting. That is, in other words, music, perhaps where music is going now is that you don't listen for things that make you, they say, ooh, that's, you know, I like that. That sounds nice. You listen for things that say, ooh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before, and somehow it's still in some sense pleasing. It's interesting. And so I think aesthetics, maybe what's happening is that aesthetics needs to expand a bit to incorporate new forms of pleasingness. Done.
Sorry, but I totally I don't really understand the aesthetic anymore. I don't understand the pleasing or non-pleasing things, because when I was in Japan many years ago and I was listening to noise music in my room, and I say, what is this stuff? I mean, sure, I mean, I can listen to this stuff for hours, but it doesn't really. But when I was in this room with these young kids playing on a very, very small space with like 180 dB and in a very super packed group of people, I kind of got engaged in something that I wouldn't have expected, and I couldn't talk to anyone because the volume was too high. I was totally squished among bodies of people in this kind of a highly energized sonic environment, and I felt a sort of a transcendence beauty in that level of intensity, which it wasn't an aesthetic experience, and it didn't have anything to do with the idea of a beautiful, pleasing sound that I was, grown with, being an Italian musician that seems to have very clear idea what is beautiful or not on many different things, unfortunately. And I thought, yeah, this is, I mean, the aesthetic discourse is a very limited discourse and doesn't take in account the contextuality, an idea that the pleasure is you know, two notes per se, C and E, don't have any value. There is any specific value in the concomitance resonance of two frequencies, and it's very contextual in the way you listen to this C major triad. If you hear C and E, and a Japanese musician that thinks Beethoven is really boring because it's all about contour. So yeah, I mean, and it's a complex thing. It's very complex. It's very individual. But I think we can gain more if you expand. And maybe that's the word you used is great. The aesthetic on a different level that is not so enslaved by Kant.
I would like to add something about this aesthetical discourse, because in the case of the work we're developing, we're dealing with complexity. And so the interpretation of complexity, it's something very strong because I don't know, maybe you will hear the CERN orchestra playing out of the collisions with a very classical orchestra organization, and you listen to this and you ask yourself, like, what is the relation of this musical, very Western classical ensemble playing something that is supposed to come out of the collider collisions? And it's like, I can hear that. It's out of the realm, but it's because they're fixing the aesthetical level. They want to keep this tradition of the orchestra. And then you go to an electronic musician, and they're working with thousands of bits of data, creating these oscillators and trying to recreate that process into a sonic behavior. And then the aesthetics is broken there because another kind of process emerges, complexity, noise, chaos. And then this is not a decision you take because of its beauty or not. It's because that's the reality of the phenomena. And you're trying to push the boundaries, putting the phenomena in front and just using sound as a bridge to recreate the materiality of this process. So in some ways, I can't remember the name, Andrew Pickering says about the universe. It's always performing, it's always dancing, everything is resonating in that sense, everything is vibrating. And also another physicist, Walter Gray, one of the fathers of cybernetics, it will say like complexity came out of every process and relationship. Like they were using very tiny machines with just light detectors to recreate the behavior of the brain. And you just need these little elements to start creating these complex processes. So I like the idea that aesthetics is not the focus. You can go further in that sense. But yes, it's a psychoacoustic experience at the end. Music and repetition is something we need to understand the experience of sound in a way. And also, just to close my idea, the relation of creativity. I like this idea from Neri Oxman. She talks about creativity as a circle, something that is connected. And you have in one quadrant science, creating knowledge out of the experience of the world. Then this knowledge goes to engineering, and they produce utility out of this experience. Then it goes to design, and design creates behavior for this utility. And then this behavior goes to the arts, and there is where consciousness about the whole process is created. And I like to think this is impossible to separate. It doesn't matter anymore if we are thinking from the scientific point of view, the artistic point of view. What it matters is we are creating knowledge in a collaborative environment.
aesthetics is like the big wild world and complex world we live in, and I don't think anybody in this room, and you can contradict me, chose the aesthetic that moved you. It just happens that it moved you and you were drawn to this. I was an autodidact and I discovered Mozart at the same time at Varese. And when I heard Varese, my life changed. And why I was so blown away and I kept listening to it and I kept being frustrated, I didn't understand it. Why did I like Varese? So why do I write the music that I write with that kind of aesthetic? I don't need to justify this. And there's a lot of pretty music out there. There's a lot of space for a lot of these different aesthetics. So, but I think that what Georgia was saying is to be able to experience art from a place of non-judgment and then have your own experience from it. But if we start experiencing art with the idea that, well, it should and it has to, or, oh, well, then we don't have a chance to talk to you. We don't have a chance to give you what we tried to figure out. Thank you.
So with my work, with the spider webs, for example, I attempt to limit my own senses and move through a natural environment and start photographing. And through that process, things emerge that I haven't seen before. And it's not that they haven't been there before, I personally haven't seen them. And in the case of the spider webs, most people haven't engaged with that. And so by doing that, I then, if I see something that is new to me and I think is new to society, then I try to capture it in a way that is not my input or minimizes my input of what is happening, and rather it allows what's happening to be presented such that someone else looking at it can look at that print and see it in as pure form as possible, which might create emergence within them, which I think ultimately it's one of my goals, at least, that the participant or the viewer, the participant I would say, get something individually by seeing my work. And then to take that, what I try to do further is with Giorgio, we do projections. So in natural environments, so setting initial conditions and then being passive and allowing participants to move through a space, a three-dimensional space. For example, this is in a forested creek, and you project two-dimensional images into this environment. You have no idea how those images are going to interact with the natural environment. What's the wind going to do? What are the leaves going to do? How are the colors going to change? What's the stream doing, the fish? And what are the spiders doing? And they're all active in this arena. And then the viewer, the participant, the audience, they get to move around and allow things to emerge within themselves if they're participating. Now, if you just sit in one spot, not much emerges. But as soon as you engage without an idea of what you're gonna see or what angles things are gonna appear, then there's this response in the audience, in the participant, that it's visceral and it's very real to see. You can see the moment where certain things click. And I think there's a large value in that. And yeah, I guess, let's see, what else do I have here? Oh yeah. And I think there's also, to the question of active creative energy and the relationship with the space, like everything that I do, I believe there's a full collaboration between what I'm seeing and what I'm doing. Everything's energetic, and it's impossible to separate those energies. And how my influence, like I capture the spider webs, and sure, I try to do it as passive as possible, but inevitably I'm having some influence on that web. And yeah, I think it's like engaging with that and being like, okay, we're working together. I'm working with the spiders, or I'm working with the trees, or they're working with me, and same with the audience. That leads to leads to discovery in myself or in others. So that's my 2 cents.
I just wanted to think about the idea of like a subjectivity and then what counts as a subjectivity. So like for the physicists might say that I'm probably going on a limb here, but subjectivity might be just a piece of film. So a wave form might collapse because it hits a film. So the and for me, the subjectivity that I used when composing my piece was this idea of sort of a duty to the communities that I was trying to represent, almost a duty to the data. And the only aesthetic consideration might have been a touch of reverb. So that idea that the work forms as it hits an audience, or it hits a community, or and sublimates and becomes real in that moment, and the only guiding consideration is this duty to the data, duty to the fact that people have ears, or the duty to I don't know, what is the subjectivity? And can we, in the long tradition of moving ourselves out of the way of the center, trying to give everything its own, pay respect to its own subjectivity? Does that make?
Hey, I'm Nicolas, so I'm in CHDH with Cyril. We played yesterday evening. I think we are working together on emergence phenomena on 2 different layers. So one is very literal. We use physical equations, and maybe we can do a little demo afterwards if audiovisual demonstration are authorized. But on another aspect, I think we choose to specifically in this CHDH project to work both on video and audio, this kind of radical synesthesia process. So it means we do not want to produce beautiful video, or we do not want to produce beautiful sound or audio or music, but we try to produce movement in between them. So really having this kind of evolution of the correlation in between these 2 medias. And we decided to use only abstract material. So what you have seen yesterday is our limit of, let's say, a complex material we can use. But otherwise, it used to be very simple shapes, whether in sound or whether in visuals. And we decided to do that because for us, it was really important for the audience to apply what they wanted to hear and see on what we were doing. I think when we are producing like sound and visuals at the same time, we are working in these temporal aspects really purely. So only working with the sound and evolution of the time and time density, and we are producing very slow evolutionary things. And so if you manage to produce something that is yeah, for me, the abstraction is the beginning of things, maybe, like the beginning of perception. And so if you manage to produce something that is in between abstract, but that is still connected to some natural behaviors, the audience is projecting itself inside it. Every time we are playing, like people came after and say, oh, I have seen this thing, like the Big Bang, or the beginning of the universe, or a fascia network inside a body, and every time a lot of people are projecting very precise shapes of information, or some stuff that are coming from their previous experiments on top of it. And so, yeah, for me, I think maybe it can relate to this kind of emerging topic, like at which time in the audience is this kind of thinking emerges, you know, like you see a shape coming, or you see something appearing, and especially in this last performance, Deciban, we have played yesterday, we really wanted to work on this relationship and difference and connection in between noise and information. Decibel is a word of Shannon. It's a very, I don't know if you know this unit of information that is the band in Shannon theory of communication. And so decibel is a tenth of a band, obviously. And so, yeah, usually you have this kind of relationship in between noise and information. Like there is an amount of information and it can be melted with noise. And so you have to find information in the noise, as you said earlier. And for us, it was really interesting in this kind of aspect of when you produce noise, what is the noise in the end? So it's very recursive thinking process. But yeah, so is the noise information in this case? And so, yeah, very immediately and obviously come the definition of noise. So, yeah, what is noise and how can we apply this definition to something aesthetics as the Japanese musical scene? Or can we define it like with an engineering definition that is something that has a lot of frequency, all the frequency of the universe? Or can we apply something else that is, yeah, more about like a personal and artistic feeling? I don't know.
It's incredible, the diversity of points of view that are here. And it's quite representative of where thinking is today, in fact. And it's too bad Linda left, but she brought up the interesting word, that tricky word of judgment. You know? Because in fact, when you have these different points of view, whether, well, Kite's gone now too, but of European, non-European systems of thought, or subject or objective approaches, these things today in our ways of thinking all exist, and they are in being explored. But in fact, we need a kind of a methodological rigor and almost a compartmentalization from time to time, because the game isn't to compare, or isn't to say one is better than the other. And that's where judgment, you know. And so to let go of aesthetic, I agree, is an important act. And it's ultimately probably because aesthetics is emergent. And again, it's another receding horizon. And so if we're dealing with scientific method, but then that we have non-dualist ways of looking at these things, is not now to say, oh, the post-Cartesian approach is better than the Cartesian approach. It doesn't, you know, the post doesn't invalidate the way, or the non-European, I mean, I'm non-European as well, you know, and there are a couple of others in this room, is another way, or another approach, philosophical approach, that Europeans have studied. John Cage, for instance, has looked at Japanese aesthetic, or Eastern philosophy. So, but it doesn't invalidate the European approach. What may be troublesome is potentially the dominance of European thinking. Okay, but it doesn't invalidate that way of thinking in and of itself. And so, what's interesting then are some of the people that have been mentioned, whether it's Francisco Varela or Andrew Pickering, who are at the interface of some of these systems of thought, of the dualist, non-dualist systems of thought, or a scientific method, but then the idea of making a mess or mangling practices. And this is where I think where a discussion like this gets to. So, yeah, and then in trying to find the information in the noise, or making noise itself information, I think is a very interesting proposition. And so to come back to Art, because he's got the microphone now. No, because I appreciated what you said about the random forest versus the convolutional neural network. But then the one thing that you said is very important, is that we know how a particle flew through. And so then we could compare one approach, a machine learning approach, against a big data approach. And so what you had there was a physics-based understanding of how this particle flew through the space, which is one understanding. But it does give you a ground truth. And so then we're able to compare a random forest versus a convolutional neural network. And indeed, the big data approach where you don't have to do anything, and it just figures it out for you, to the chagrin of scientists and their own egos, is that it's pretty good, you know, and because it does fit the ground truth that you have. But you've got the ground truth there. The truth is the tricky word, you know. It just happens to be the thing that you're comparing against. And so what we're looking at in these really amazing diversity of thought is that the ground truth element it can be shifting. And this is why I say it is relativist, and where I just ask for methodological rigor and compartmentalization is because depending on what problem you're dealing with at that moment, you might say, okay, here's my system of thought, it works here. Okay, I can have another system of thought, and we might be able to map across them, you know. But in what I do, what's clear is that, and I use the word truth, but I'm not going to get into false truths or whatever the Trump stuff is. But ground truth is tricky for me in what is my body doing in a musical performance. Okay? Or if I do it and I get an algorithm to track it, and someone else does it, does the same gesture, and the algorithm can't track it, why? Okay? Well, it's because we're different bodies. Okay, and then we could say, okay, well, we can get a machine learning algorithm to recognize the same gesture across different bodies, and then it's the same. But then we might not want that because it's reductionist. Because my body doing what we think is the same gesture is very different than another body doing that gesture. And here in creative practice with these algorithms, we are taking an approach that can be fundamentally different than the canonical exercises. For example, looking at invariance. If we do handwriting recognition or all the great voice recognition that's out there these days, you want to just be able to talk to the computer and say, okay, I said yes in this interactive menu system. But then the big data algorithm has to have all the different ways of saying yes. Yeah, yo, we, yes. And your telephone interactive system just it reduces that to a canonical yes. But what I'm interested in creative applications are, in fact, the expressive differences in the different ways that we might do the same thing. And for that, I am lacking big data. Unless I put on a physiological tracking system and just wear it full time in my life, I can't capture enough data about myself. I don't, and then I don't really want to put the same sensor system on everyone and get a big data set and say, okay, we're going to reduce it all to figure out what everyone, you know, do a population average. And so in the things that I'm doing, I'm working with little data, and ground truth has shaky ground, let's say. And so those are some of the challenges in applying some of the algorithms here in musical performance that I'm dealing with.
My approach is not to couple aesthetic with pleasing. That the aesthetic really is something that provokes some kind of emotional reaction. So aesthetic is interesting, not boring, not necessarily pleasing. But if it has no reaction, I don't see the art in it. Second thing is the discussion, the different approaches here for emergence. And I have to say this gives me a different idea of the richness of the artistic world. When I think in physics about these emergent phenomena, they're paradigm shifts. If you're lucky, you'll see one or two of them in your lifetime. And you guys are expecting it to show up every night or every few days anyway. Because you're dealing in a more complex world where that is possible. But it's really interesting to compare the strengths and weaknesses of that, how big the paradigm shift is that gets you some. You know, I don't think you can expect it all the time. I think you find one and you exploit it, and see how you can explain it and how, or not explain it, transmit it to, communicate it to other people to see if they, to see how they work. And that's what your business is. And it's really an interesting one.
I'm not interested in objectify again an activity that may be just beautiful in the way it is. I think that there is beauty in the way we operate. There is beauty in the energy. Even in this thing, there is beauty. There is beauty here, people sharing all this shifting idea, this uncertainty about things that we try to question ourselves in every day. And I find that, for me, more fulfilling. I don't need to find, I don't want to work towards an object that someone will say, oh, great, Giorgio, great, beautiful piece. I don't need that. I fulfill my living energy in a kind of a desire that manifests itself as a behavior. Not that I say that my behavior is beautiful, but there is an intensity in my behavior that is kind of transcending the judgment of, something useful, something beautiful in a kind of a Western maybe idea. Because, as I say, beautiful, Beethoven is boring to many Japanese people I met when I was there, and I was surprised because I love Beethoven. I say, why, you don't like it? I don't love Beethoven, his energy is great, but they say, well, it's boring. Okay, great. I find the beauty of Beethoven, though, not being an aesthetic beauty, but be an energized force of someone that tries to reconcile something that is always unreconcilable. And I don't know, but that's my position. I mean, if people like to see in different ways, that's great. I'm not going to change anyone's idea. I just want to, the aesthetic and the sentimentality that is carried on is too much for me. As I say, sentimental man is an heroic man, is produce fascism most of the time.
I'm Adrian. I was playing with the Vancouver Electronic Ensemble last night with Elvira, and I was playing drum set. I wasn't playing electronics. And so, like, I guess with talking about emergence, like I feel like it's a really interesting idea that playing in like an improvised setting, like I feel like, I don't know what y'all think about the relationship between emergence and maybe discovery. I don't know if those things are synonyms or antonyms or maybe completely different concepts altogether, but I definitely feel like last night, like there were definitely moments where like I felt like I was something like, I don't know where these things were coming from, but like they were happening, and like and I think that, for example, specifically like just finding different timbres like on the drum set, and this kind of comes from like an idea I had that I learned from my teacher, where he uses only 2 drums, so like the snare drum and the floor tom, and then this kind of acts as like a platform to add different textures, and I never really conceived of that before. And so like now, like that's a huge thing that I'm trying to like to do with like the instrument, because like it's really crazy the relationship with having like less to have more, because like placing different objects, for example, like towels or like whatever else, and like you expand like the sonic palette of the instrument, and also like playing the drums, just like being a noisy instrument, like inherently, like, and trying to like make it not sound noisy is kind of a trip, because like you're physically like the what is happening on the drums, from what I understand, is just extremely complex, because there's no like, that's why you can't really discern certain pitches, right? Because there's just so many physical like things happening with the membrane, like all the waves that they produce, and like even the cymbals, like even when you hit the cymbal once, and like I don't know, I remember seeing these pictures of the cymatics of like different frequencies, like just within one cymbal hit, like all of these things interacting with one another. It's just kind of like, it's really interesting how like, while like most, like I feel like my practice, like as a musician, and I'm interested in how you three think of it too, in terms of like your relationship to the instruments that you play and like how that influences like, you know, improvisation or like composition, like, yeah, like how do you like look into the instrument in a different way? Like, how do you keep it fresh for yourself? And then when you find something that you that you find interesting, how do you develop that further into something that maybe is like that is like maybe like more like thought of in a more like concrete way? So instead of like something that just like happens ephemerally, but then something that becomes more sculptural or like compositional maybe?
Yes, hello, my name is Ruth Dyson and I'm a recorder player. I'm a recorder player, yeah. I played yesterday with this lovely ensemble. Yeah, so where can I start with Emergence? Well, I think I feel very, very connected actually because my instrument is from before time. I mean, we also have medieval and Baroque and Renaissance recorders, so I actually believe that it's very important to look to the past as well, to come to the future. And I believe that, yeah, to express yourself, you have to find a very, yeah, there are many different ways of expressing yourself. But for example, yesterday I was playing a Petzold recorder, which was made in the 80s. It was first designed in the 80s. And yeah, there are many different sounds that you can create, and I think that Giorgio said yesterday that if he hadn't looked, if he had his eyes closed while he was listening, he would have absolutely no idea that this was actually a recorder. If you think about the primary school instrument that maybe quite a few people started on as a child, you would have no idea that this could connect to this instrument. But for me, yeah, to create these new sounds and to let go, to let the subconscious, during the performance, after all the years of study and all the years of technical study and practice and learning about all these different compositional techniques, when I'm on stage, I just tend to let go. And I think what emerges is something from a subconscious state, actually. And this is what is most important to me, and hopefully also what comes across to the audience is something else. It's not a language, it's not, maybe it's not even music, I don't know. There's no way of expressing it. Maybe it's just something else. It's indescribable. And I think that's one of the most interesting things from my perspective.
A lot of our work is also with interaction with composers, because we are, sometimes also we are improvising, but 90% that we are playing like text, so from another person. So it's really also important to understand, or maybe sometimes you don't understand the text, but you have to try to find your way and to create maybe another thing. So you have the instrument, you have your techniques, you have your sounds, you have the text, and then you have to create the third thing, the third element. So this is always a challenge, yeah. And this is really interesting because we are playing historical instruments, so with a big tradition, and we have always to find a new way to get out of this tradition, but also to keep, this reference, because it's very important, for us as musicians, a classical trained musician, because we are classical trained musicians, but in the contemporary society, so
Okay, it occurs to me that we seem to be having a little friction, probably my fault, about aesthetics. But it occurs to me that aesthetics is really a pretty important topic in art. And I think I can completely agree that the idea of prescriptive and proscriptive aesthetics, that is, you know, when people say that's good and that's not, okay, this is what the artistic community has to fight against, right? And yet, the artistic community has to also deal with personal aesthetics, which is to say, I find this compelling or interesting or beautiful or whatever. I like it, right? And nature presents us with an extraordinarily large choice of things to experience and listen to and see. And we have to make some choices. And so we tend to make those choices on the basis of what pleases us, okay, individually. But the artistic community has a problem, which the scientific community only has about a third as much of. We have it too, but in the artistic community, ultimately, some artists are raised to a high status and others are not, okay? And that's kind of sad in a sense, because the people who don't make it for what seem sometimes to be completely arbitrary reasons suffer. And yet, it is part of the artistic community to make distinctions between things that become popular or approved of and things that are less so. So I have a very strong feeling for how troubling that struggle is. And I can see why anybody would be very much opposed to proscriptive and prescriptive aesthetics. But personal aesthetics is almost the same thing as consciousness.
Giorgio had framed the question of aesthetics in the third question of participation. And so, in fact, I don't really see a friction. There is a real, basically we're agreeing that aesthetics, if taken wrongly, could be a problem. And in fact, in its pure form, probably isn't or shouldn't be a problem. And Art described it without the judgment in the personal aesthetic, something that provokes emotional reaction. But we can go beyond using that charged word emotion, just to say aesthetics is the thing that causes an affective reaction, so an affect. And so there we try to get beyond these value systems of, who makes it in the art world, and indeed in the science world. Also there are stars, there's a star system. So once again, these are the systems that are at fault and not the thing itself. And so indeed, Georgia, when you associate the words beauty with aesthetics or sentimental with aesthetics, you're the one who's done that, not us. So, So indeed, in Italy, the beauty is such a highly developed thing, that we have to escape from it. And, and so we might be able to separate this as personal aesthetics or not. And we can get into Adorno's aesthetic theory and all this. But short of that, what am I trying to say? Well, to go beyond the romantic notion of aesthetics is, I think, important. In fact, even if you're doing romantic music, Beethoven got over the romanticism of his own music, and that's why he did great music. It happens to be in the Romantic era. And so, because the romanticism is a form of indulgence. And in what we're trying to get through here, these diverse systems of thinking and allowing things to emerge, which is then a letting go of the indulgence, letting go of the ego. Well, these are things that composers, again, like John Cage, were fascinated in. But I met Cage back in my student days. And the reason Cage was interested in letting go of the ego was because he had a very big one. He was interested in Eastern philosophy because he was a Western man. But that's not to say Cage is an asshole. He was great. He was hilarious. But to understand the context, that leads us to these things. And so with participation, I agree, Giorgio, that, we do need to break out of the venues and the formulas and the systems in which we practice our art, because they can be echo chambers. And so we do want to bust out and take our practices elsewhere to see what effect and affect they have elsewhere. And yes, that leads to participatory practice, but I really want to get to this because, I am a composer and a performer, but trained in a time in conservatory, working as a composer, being told by my teachers, well, you should not perform your own work. It's different. So I'm coming from that highly hierarchical system of art production and just wanted to get out of it. And so punk rock was a good way. And I did open up to interaction with technology, exhibition works, installation works, and then participatory works. But there's a element in this, and Claire Bishop writes about this in a book called Artificial Hells, where participation in itself is probably good, but then it's what's done with it, right? That gets to be tricky. And so there's an old famous, I've written some text about participatory music. There's an old political poster from May 68 in Paris, and they conjugate the verb participer. Je participe, tu participes, il participe, nous participons, vous participez, et il profite. You participate, I participate, we all participate, and they exploit. Right? So that's 60s political. And that's the thing that we just have to be mindful of, in that participatory art actually has become the political agenda of gentrification and the regenerating city and so forth. So in as much as I understand your desire to bust out of the borders and to confine us in our sort of esoteric art practice, borders have been broken over the years. Politicians have picked up on this as a nice dynamic for regenerating neighborhoods. And so that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to go for participation, but it's could be a poison chalice, so that there are many questions there in that. So I think participatory methodology, to answer your third question, is in and of itself probably good, but then it's fraught with dangers. And then for me to get to that last question of authorship, then we are getting to times when traditional roles, textual transmission of music still exists, but there are other ways, all within one person, or non-textual transmission. Again, it doesn't invalidate the old ways, but these are all very fluid ways of looking at authorship.
I wanted to thank Ingrid and Randy for hosting this event here, and everyone here that just took the time on a Saturday morning to share ideas, energy, and beautiful thoughts. I think this is, for me, is always very important. And I appreciate your generosity and your time. So thank you very much to everyone. The last very thing I want to say, and I say with honoring this thing, the diversity that is. One thing that emerged in my knowledge when I moved to Canada was the understanding of a great Canadian artist. His name is Glenn Gould. When I was a kid, studying music in conservatory music, Glenn Gould probably was one of the only Canadian musician that was known to Italian musicians at the time. Italians don't know what Canada is or where it is and what they're doing. But he was. But the idea of that a musician was filtered by an aesthetic about a vision about this artist, this genius pianist that plays Bach in a way that has never been heard. Then I moved to Canada, and I became a rugged Canadian man, and happily so. And I started looking at Glenn Gould in a very different way. I kind of always loved this way of singing in Bach and making noise. But the noise is not such. It's actually a way of revealing the quality of his Bach contrapoint as a very beautiful metaphor or analogy with the Canadian society that I envisioned at the time, coming with an idea maybe highly idealized of a multicultural society and the great Pierre Trudeau and all the multicultural act. But Glenn Gould became for me the very, very Canadian artist, the one that actually embodied that beautiful idea of difference as an organism where single thing is part of the whole, is not more important, there is no subject and contra-subject, it's not a hierarchical quality or value that is given to parts and sound. And so that's something that was a kind of a very beautiful revelation, and I kind of listened to Glenn Gould just to feed that idea all the time, not even to listen to Bach anymore. Just the sound of his voice and the way he's moving around in that kind of contrapoints is just a beautiful metaphor of what we have been talking about. And so, thank you, Glenn Gould. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you tonight at the show. Thank you.